Are you a total Gleek, or do you hate Glee with a burning passion? I'm Laura Youngblood, and welcome to my YouTube channel, From Laura's Perspective. If you've watched my videos before and already know that, I'm glad to see you again. Yes, I started watching Glee my freshman year of high school and came to fall in love with the story and premise as someone who sang in choir and performed in theater all throughout middle school and high school. Even for a musical set at the turn of the decade between the 2000s and 2010s, some would say that Glee hasn't aged particularly well. To some extent, these people are right, but Glee is still a pretty good show in my opinion. How can this be? Well, that's what this video is all about. As a Gleek, I love the show with all my heart, but have to acknowledge that there are some things that are seriously wrong with it. So let's get down to it. One of the things I always hated about Glee was that it made me want to audition for my high school show choir. But when I went to go do that, every year, I didn't get in. What pisses me off most is that for New Directions, the show choir around which Glee centers, everyone who auditions gets in per their policy. Ranting about my personal issues aside, this sets an unrealistic expectation for kids in the real world in which show choirs are actually very selective. But this isn't the only thing that makes William McKinley High School, the school Glee takes place at, unrealistic. Any faculty member at a real-life high school would be fired on the spot if they taught anything like New Directions director Will Schuester. Just as a few examples, he came to recruit Finn Hudson after listening to him sing in the shower while he was in the locker room where a teacher should never be. In Season 5, Episode 5, The End of Twerk, Mr. Shu actually not only teaches a lesson about twerking, but joins the Glee Club in covering Robin Thicke's Blurred Lines, a song whose lyrics are about coercive sexual advances. That wouldn't fly at a real-life high school. When second-generation Glee Club member Marley Rose develops an eating disorder, Will doesn't show an awful lot of concern. When Marley faints at sectionals as a result of not eating enough beforehand, Will is mostly concerned about the result it will have on New Directions placement. The next season, when Marley feels uncomfortable about wearing a bikini for a public New Directions performance of Lady Gaga's Applause, Will scolds Marley in front of the entire Glee Club and even suspends her for a week. This would never happen at a real-life public high school where dress codes actually prohibit students from engaging in partial nudity, let alone faculty members from pressuring them to do so. With all the time I've spent talking about good guy Will Schuester's misdemeanors as a teacher, I don't have time to talk about all the things that would get WMHS cheerleading coach and Glee's antagonist, Sue Sylvester, fired from the school, if not arrested. So let's move on to something the show did right. The New Directions may be portrayed and perceived by outsiders as unpopular, subpar performing underdogs, at least early on in the show. But let me tell you, this is one talented show choir. All the actors cast in the roles of New Directions members sing clearly and right on pitch, and even put their own unique spin on each of the songs they're covering. I know I'm not the only one who listens to covers of her favorite songs from the GLEE soundtracks on Spotify. I once even met someone who said, "I don't really like GLEE, but damn, they make some good covers." So if there's anything worth watching the show for, it's the covers. But there's just one little thing that bothered me, as well as the general GLEE fan base, about the covers. Remember how I just said that everyone in the GLEE club has a really good singing voice? Well, even so, it seems that at least 90% of all leading solos in the covers are given to two characters in particular. If you've seen the show, you know which characters I'm referring to. For those of you who haven't seen it, Finn Hudson is the WMHS quarterback Mr. Shue creepily listened to singing in the locker room shower, then blackmails into joining the club. Rachel Berry is the aspiring Broadway actress who serves as the de facto GLEE club captain and is every bit as irritating and bossy as her actress Leah Michele. Sure, they're the main characters of the show, but it seems that for every competition and performance, and for the majority of other song scenarios, Finn and/or Rachel was the one doing the leading vocals, while everyone else in the club was just singing background oohs and ahs. Sure, the other characters did occasionally get a solo, but these were usually few in number and/or very brief. And many of their characters publicly and privately voice that they are unhappy with the lack of solos they get. And I mean, I'm sure that we, as an audience, would like to hear a little more of, in particular, Tina, Santana, Mercedes, Brittany, Mike, and Sam's solos, since their voices are so amazing. Of course, GLEE couldn't represent every race, culture, religion, sexuality, and disability under the sun. But the members of the GLEE Club, and the show in general, can be considered diverse and representative of the groups in the average American public high school. As far as race goes, 5 of the original 12 GLEE Club members are of color. Mercedes Jones and Matt Rutherford, who are black, Mike Chang and Tina Cohen Chang, who are Asian American, and Santana Lopez, who is Latina. 2 of the white characters in the GLEE Club, Rachel Berry and Noah Puckerman, are Jewish, and 2 characters with disabilities are portrayed over the course of the show. Artie Abrams, who is in a wheelchair because of a spinal cord injury, and Ryder Lynn from seasons 4 and 5, who is dyslexic. The show's LGBTQ representation includes Kurt Hummel, Blaine Anderson, Santana Lopez, Brittany Pierce, and Wade Unique Adams. And to some extent, all of these characters are complex, made up of so much more than their race, ethnicity, or disability. That being said, although GLEE portrays so-called diverse characters in a much more positive light than was common in 2010, and I know that sounds weird to say, given that 2010 was only 12 years ago, these characters exude many of the stereotypes and archetypes that were common at the time and to some extent still are today. For example, Mercedes is a gospel singer who uses her voice to belt and wail in each number. Santana Lopez is the very stereotypical, loud-mouthed, hot-headed, wisecracking Latina. Mike is an Asian whose parents want him to be a doctor and won't tolerate any grade lower than an A+. Gay boy Kurt has a very feminine voice, interests, and style of dress, and is portrayed as being very vulnerable to bullying, name-calling, and harassment, and at one point joins the football team as a kicker as a way to hide his sexuality from both his father and his peers. And Artie exudes the archetype of the wheelchair-bound nerd, complete with glasses and a vest, who is often ignored, picked on, and initially has a hard time getting girls. But diversity is just one small part of how one of the best things a TV show can do is portray the difficult realities of the real world within their story arcs, and this is definitely something that GLEE does, or at least makes the effort to. There are many hot and heavy things going on all throughout the series, including the bullying of the GLEE Club members, particularly the LGBTQ ones, Rachel having 2 gay dads and meeting her birth mother, Shelby Corcoran, Quinn's teen pregnancy, Sam and his family's impromptu homelessness, Dave Karofsky's suicide attempt in Season 3, Quinn's car accident and resulting spinal cord injury, Coach Beast leaving her husband Cooter after an incident of domestic violence, Marley Rose's eating disorder, and Coach Beast's gender transition, just as a few examples. But remember, it's not enough to simply include these kinds of story arcs, and in the case of GLEE, by new standards set 12 years after the show originally aired and 7 years after it ended, GLEE dealt with many of these topics in unrealistic, insensitive ways. Probably the most notable is Marley's eating disorder. As I mentioned earlier, Marley was blamed for fainting at sectionals, and when the adults learned of her eating disorder, they did next to nothing to help her. Some would say that the school shooting sequence in Season 4, Episode 18, Shooting Star, was insensitive and unrealistic, especially given that the episode aired only a few months after the infamous shooting at Sandy Hook Elementary School in Newtown, Connecticut. In the aforementioned sequence, the sound of a gunshot is heard, and the school goes into lockdown with the emotions of the terrified GLEE Club members sitting on the floor and feeling helpless on display. But after the all clear is given, it's revealed that it was a false alarm and merely the sound of shots fired from a gun into the floor of Sue Sylvester's office, and no students or faculty members were killed or injured. In real-life school shootings, students and faculty members die and are seriously injured, and the community is left never quite the same again. And no GLEE could forget that moment near the end of Season 1, Episode 7, Throwdown, in which Will gives his take on the racial and ethnic differences within the New Directions, which is that by virtue of being in the GLEE Club, you're all minorities. Being in an unpopular club isn't quite the same thing as generations upon generations of prejudice and discrimination. And honestly, this was a really good opportunity for a lesson on intersectionality and privilege, but instead Will used the I don't see color approach. There are so many more examples I could include, but I think you get the gist. Before I go on any further, there are lots of spoilers in this section. So if you want to avoid that, feel free to skip ahead to my final thoughts. At the beginning of GLEE, WMHS Spanish teacher Will Schuster takes over the underfunded and underperforming GLEE club after its original director, Sandy Ryerson, is falsely accused of inappropriate touching by Rachel Berry in retaliation for not being given a solo. Will comes up with the name New Directions and hosts open auditions, but is initially only able to recruit 5 members. Through a problematic scheme, Will also recruits the captain of the football team, Finn Hudson, who himself brings a few of his teammates into the club. Through hard work and dedication, the club makes their way to a sectionals victory, from which they move on to regionals, only to lose. The club is almost cut, but Principal Figgins is persuaded to bring it back. In the following season, transfer student Sam Evans is introduced to the club, and they finally win regionals, making it to nationals where they place 12th. In the next season, many of the original GLEE Club members have their final year at McKinley before graduating, during which they not only once again win sectionals and regionals, but finally achieve their goal of winning nationals. In Season 4, with most of the original GLEE Club members graduating and trying to make it in the real world, a new group of members is introduced. While Will goes away to fight for arts education in Washington, ND alum Finn Hudson is left to supervise the group and take them to sectionals, which they lose due to Marley passing out. But the club comes back and they're on their way to regionals after their rivals, the Warblers, are proven to have cheated at sectionals. They win their regional again, but in the 5th season, they place only 2nd at nationals, leading Sue, who has taken over as principal, to cut the program. In the next and final season, Sue has established dominance and dictatorship as principal of WMHS, and the former choir room has been turned into a computer lab. Rachel Berry and Kurt Hummel, who've been forced back home due to personal failures in New York, bring New Directions back to McKinley and direct it, while Will is now coaching Vocal Adrenaline, and Blaine Anderson, who's also been forced home to Ohio, is coaching the Dalton Academy Warblers. Near the end of the season, ND wins their sectional, and in the final episode, they win nationals. Moreover, WMHS becomes a performing arts school, at which Will Schuster becomes principal. While watching the finale, it just made me tear up to think how far everyone had come since the pilot episode. Even for GLEE's many flaws and shortcomings, most of which should not have been acceptable between 2009 and 2015, it's a pretty good show all in all, with good music, a relatable premise, and interesting, dynamic characters. If you like hearing me talk about TV shows, also check out my recent video breaking down the strengths and weaknesses of Netflix original series Atypical, and also my new playlist Television, both of which can be accessed through the links on your screen. And remember, I also talk about music, movies, and literature on my channel, as well as politics, current events, history, art, food, and drink. If you liked my video and you like those topics, quit stalling and just subscribe to join my video essay library and bang that notification bell so you know when it's added to.